Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. Today, we're going to be answering your questions through the Stride Discord. So we've been having this Q&A up for quite some time now. So now we're going to get through a lot of the questions today. So make sure to check out the Stride Discord as well as Watch the Throne, featuring Leo, Tweak, Spargo, Akola, Proto Banham, Light, Bloom Fervor, and Glutony, who were invited, and the Buzz and Mia, who qualified through SmashCon, and of course now Luis, who just got voted in, was our first vote in. So it's going to be in Guildhouse December 8th through 10th. Make sure to check it out on the VGBC Twitch channel. Yeah, really excited for this invitational tournament brought to you by Smash University, Tweak Talks, Lights Out, Guildhouse, and Red Bull. But back to the topics for today. We got Ramses going to be reading off these questions, and of course me and Tony alongside of him going to be answering them. So yeah, let's get into it.
All right, so I went through the Discord and I found what I think are the most interesting questions. And let's start out with an absolute banger, all right? So which characters do you guys think is broken, but that haven't broken out yet, / that aren't talked about enough? And why do you think we aren't seeing them? What do you think?
I mean, I always say Marth in this situation, but I'll think about it and I'll give another answer. But I generally think Marth is a lot better than people give credit for. There's a ton of setups that Marth has to essentially get the stock at 30%, 40%. That is way more unique than Lucina. I think you actually have to play Marth a lot different than Lucina for a lot of matchups, just because he has that early KO potential.
Yeah. As for me, I think the classic answer that I've been giving for a hot minute is Lucario. I think Lucario is just he has the potential, you know what I mean? He has so many movement tech options, mostly with wave bounce, neutral B stuff, but it requires so much. And the hardest thing about Lucario that I think makes him really underrepresented right now is that he requires more matchup knowledge than almost any character in the game, right? Because you're reliant on not dying, and the best way to not die is to know exactly how the opponent could kill you, and then you plan for it beforehand. But first of all, you need to know how to plan, which is already more than what most players do. And then second of all, you need to know exactly what to plan for, and not just one thing, right? Multiple paths that all lead to kills. So not only is he just technically demanding, he's also strategically demanding, and he demands a lot of game knowledge. So I think that is kind of in the pick that I've been sticking to. I think another one that I don't think America is ready for is that Chrom is still a good character.
Oh, whoa. Dang.
Yeah. I know we're all hating on Chrom. And let me say this. I think Chrom in a tournament setting is ass. I think if you play Chrom every round, there's going to be that round in which you get gimped to 0 and you kind of lose. You know what I mean? Right. But I think in an individual set, that character can do damage. Jab S-Smash kills you at 60. Just in general, his moves being able to hit ledge is super good. I think on paper, for example, he has a better matchup against Kazuya and Steve, which are two huge meta threats right now, than Roy, right? So that's kind of my more controversial pick. Is I think Chrom. I'm not saying he's good, but I'm saying he's not where Twitter puts him to be.
Oh man.
So for me, this is going to be more of a counterintuitive pick, but I think the most underrated character is Steve. Actually, I think he's way better than he is already seen as. So I think he's just secretly triple S here. He's just Steve players haven't brought him to quite that level yet. On a more on the nose example, in the spirit of the question, is I think Mega Man. I've mentioned before, I think Mega Man is potentially one of the best characters in the game as you continue to optimize him. If Sora is as reasonable as Mega Man is to perfect, then I think Sora is also in the same vein. And then I think that of the most certainly practical characters, I think Bayonetta is secretly one of the top tier characters in the game.
Secretly in America. We Europeans, we know.
Around.
Dude.
Yes.
Europeans know.
Well, Europeans do know. She's definitely up there, specifically just with her ability to play from offstage and in the corner and turn these usually disadvantageous positions into pretty strong advantages. It's very powerful to have in a character.
After burner kick.
Yeah.
Very
yes,
good
sir.
move.
The way Bloom talks about it is that she kind of plays like Sonic in a lot of ways. In that she just plays defensively, And the issue is like, okay, so I play Shulk, right? And Shulk, like traditionally you'd think, oh, Shulk is amazing as Bayo because you shield her out of her combos and like you can kill her really early with smash. And like that's all true. But here's the issue, right? You play your neutral, you hit Bayo, you do like 15% damage. She wins neutral 1, she does like 60, 70. I mean, not that against Shield Art, but like, you know, Shield Art has more combo than or more cooldown than her combos do. And then you're down like 50, and now you have to approach her. And the dynamic of approaching Bayo is just like for, I would say most characters, I think there's like a few exceptions, but for 99% of characters approaching Bayo, it's a disadvantageous situation, right? And even if you hit her, she has so much mobility in her disadvantage, she can escape so often. It is insane. Like down angle afterburner kick, it's all the way to the other side of the stage. Like Tony said, just her offstage play, right? Not just like in advantage, but also disadvantageously. She can fish for reversals, right? So definitely Bayo. Tony, I'd like to ask, because I know we talked about it on the Mega Man episode, but since we have a little bit of time to just discuss right now, why exactly do you feel like Mega Man could be one of the best characters in the game?
So, for those who do not know, even before he has altered his character with Metal Blade and such, just having both up air and down air, which can be plus on block, sets up for really powerful situations. He has a bunch of multi-hits that can take advantage of the shield pressure on the follow-up, so you can't afford to really just hold on to your shield and wait. He has a frame 6 with an invulnerable frame kill move that kills at mid%. He's got a frame 8 killing up smash out of shields, and then when he doesn't, he's got a frame 7 back air that also is a kill move at higher percents. So he just has a lot of very potent materials, and then on top of that, some of the features that I usually look for in a character at the start of any Smash game is just their ability to move, like their movement stats. And Mega Man has one of, if not the best, combinations of short hop and fast fall in the game. So not every character can quite cross over the threshold into which your short hop fast fall is unreactable, but Mega Man does do so.
Yeah, and Mega Man also can like do back air drag downs into up tilt and stuff like that. Obviously, his item isn't the strongest, but it's still an item, and you can still do Z-drop stuff, right? Which can also be positive on block when you like Z-drop the shield or Z-drop Metal Blade onto someone while you're not looking at them. It can get multiple hits off during the drop, right? And then you have pressure from there. Having a similar up air to Game & Watch, we already know how strong Game & Watch is overall, but I think the community overall underrated Game & Watch / Mega Man's up air in the very beginning of the game, and now we're seeing how like incredibly strong it is. You have true block strings on platforms and stuff like that, so very, very powerful character. Yeah, very powerful tool.
Once you start getting into like the TAS level stuff, he's going to get basically the same kill setups that characters like Steve get, where they just get a footstool mid% kill move that's frame 4 out of shield. God forbid you get parried. Basically anything that's not plus is just death at that point, because he's just going to get a footstool Z-drop into drag down back air to up tilt. And the reason that I'm not 100% sure that it's consistent is just because Mega Man players do drop it, and even most of the Steve players drop just regular footstool down airs. And so as you increase the complexity of the inputs, it becomes exponentially less consistent. And so I'm not sure if we'll reach that point, but if we do, that's the idea, is that even the low to the ground, easy to pick trees are very reasonable to do and very powerful things that you can do. But also, as you continue to optimize the character, he'll always have more room than the humans are going to be able to achieve.
He is a robot after all.
Literally, yes.
Yeah. No, for sure. Fun fact, actually, I don't know if this is a fun fact because I never tested myself, but I've been told that Mega Man's short up fast fall is faster than Fox's because he doesn't enter hard landing when he fast falls out of his short hop, whereas Fox does. So while Fox's like airtime is less, Mega Man has less landing lag, so his short hop fast fall is technically like less laggy than Fox's short hop fast fall, which is insane.
I have a hard time believing that, because when you're in fast fall state, doesn't every character have 4 frames of impact landing?
Yeah, so that's not.
Does he ignore it or something, or is it character based?
It's very character specific, yeah. So like it's just a very specific combination of factors that make you get your hard landing or your soft landing, and I don't know exactly what rule governs it. I've been told that Mega Man doesn't enter hard landing from short up fast fall. But yeah,
Okay,
interesting.
Maybe something our viewers can lab out and tell us because we're too busy to go to the labs ourselves. No, I'm just kidding, but
we need character communities.
yeah, we do need character. We can't do it all. You know what I mean? So
exactly. Okay, let's move on. Or do you guys have anything to add?
I'm down to shout out a couple more characters that are I feel like a little underrated, like Mewtwo and Meta Knight, but it's like I can't go into specific because they don't have like task level stuff. Obviously, like I got to throw in Task Link and Task Banjo just for the hell of it, but I mean those are a little bit more impractical in my opinion, and that's probably why we haven't really seen them like come up as often. But yeah, I think Mewtwo and Meta Knight are also really solid characters. Shout out to the show, does amazing stuff with Meta Knight, and yeah, I mean it's just those two characters. They feel very solid, and I feel like it's just hard to be a solid character in this game, right? Because there's characters like Steve. One thing I want to say about Steve that Tony brought up, maybe we'll have an episode dedicated to it, but Waidu has the week of Steve buffs, and I think it would be really cool if all of us went through it and kind of like talked about how like maybe like, oh, is this tech practical? Like how strong is this tech? Like how many situations will this come up in? Yeah, because I think all the content Waidu is putting out is kind of supports like, but is Steve like above 3 tiers of the other characters, right? Is it S++ like technically an aspect of like when this character gets developed?
For sure. No, for sure. And I think especially characters like Meta Knight, so theoretically Meta Knight is going to get a lot better over the years as the meta gets more counter pick heavy, right? Yep. Which is something that we notice, like any competitive game as time goes on gets more counter pick heavy because like there's diminishing returns on investing in a singular character. Picking up a secondary character then becomes stronger. And Meta Knight is, well, outside of like arguably like Min, he's probably like the best counter pick character in the game, right? So yeah, huge agree with that one. Okay, so let's do an easy one. All right, so this is a question, like 6 words. For advantage state, edge guarding versus ledge trapping, which is better? What do you think, Tony?
Oof,
it's going to be matchup contextual. I would say that. Yeah, there's so many variables to this equation. Like which stage are we on? Like what is the setup for the edge guard? What is the setup for the ledge trap? I think that on average, there's more of the casts that have stronger ledge traps than edge guarding, just because there's so much excellent set play based characters in the game. And I think that set play is stronger at ledge traps where the opponent's options are more defined, more limited than edge guarding, just because you need to understand that when you're in an edge guarding situation in general, there are going to be variables of even just pixels in a game that cares about pixels of difference on whether or not something connects. I just was looking at a screen cap, speaking of Lucario, where somebody hit Lucario's head. You could see the actual visual hitbox connecting with Lucario's head, but only like his muzzle. And he was pulling back during it, so it's just an interpolating frame where the game had already registered him pulling back. So he was basically frame perfectly dodging it with a pullback on a forward smash. Like this is just that kind of game where precision is very important for achieving consistency. And so you are a lot less likely to achieve that consistency through edge guarding. I will also say, however, that peak reward on setups tends to skew toward taking the stock with edge guarding more than it does with ledge traps, although obviously that's not all the way across the board. You're going to have obvious examples like setups into spikes for taking the stock at the ledge and such. But that, again, a lot of this comes down to the variability of specific ledge options like ledge jump, and that's why these setups tend to be less consistent. So other than that, though, I'd say ledge traps, if you're shooting to raise your consistency, that's what you're going for. If you're looking to beat an opponent who you feel like you're not likely to beat, you're usually better off high rolling and going for your edge guard situations and focusing on those, because the odds of you hitting the 10% of games that you're going to win versus someone who is very likely to beat you is going to be through you achieving those low consistency options that have very high reward, and then you snowballing from there. And so that's my answer to that.
Before I give my answer, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And of course, chat, YouTube. We would love to hear your answers to all these questions as well. So let us know what you think the most underrated character in the game is. Also, let us know what you think, which is better, edge guarding or ledge trapping, and feel free to join us in the comments for any of these questions. For me, I'm going to have to say ledge trapping overall, just because it's the most common state of disadvantage, because there's a lot of things that are going to limit characters, like all characters, from being good at juggling, being good at edge guarding. But I feel like no matter how bad your character is, your character can ledge trap, no matter what. That's a very universal thing, and the main thing that makes it universal is you do not need any type of burst of mobility to ledge trap. When you're juggling, sometimes lack of mobility can be compensated with very large hitboxes. So Corn is not the most mobile character in the game, but is notoriously very strong at juggling because of very enormous hitboxes that make up for the lack of mobility, right? Fox, very good at juggling because he can track you with his movement speed, get to a specific location where you're going at, and he can throw out an up air that's not super large, but it doesn't matter because he's very fast. So he's going to get to the spot he needs to get to. So, and then throw out the up air, and it's lagless, so it can frame trap and stuff like that. And also, do you have frame trapping aerials for juggling, right? That's very important to have if you want to have strong juggling. Strong edge guarding, you also need that mobility. Characters like Pikachu and Sonic have bursts of mobilities, or Bayonetta has bursts of mobilities with certain special moves, right? That they can go in one spot, then zip over to another spot and cover another option that you use your double jump to get out of and stuff like that. So not every character has accessibility to that type of mobility. So I think the most common form of advantage state or disadvantage state is going to be the ledge trapping. So I'm just gonna say ledge trapping just because it's the most common and universal one, and I'm gonna agree with Tony in terms of like the overall reward of all the or disadvantage states. Like for the person in advantage, the biggest spike of reward is edge guarding, right? Because you can literally get a KO on Crom at 0% because you hit his double jump or something. And a lot of characters fall into that category, right? Even Cloud, you can get one good double jump read and that's their stock, right? I mean, we've seen a lot of players at top level play make crazy comebacks with insane edge guards. So, yeah.
So, I play Shulk. So like ledge trapping for me is super important, but edge guarding maybe even more so. I think Shulk is like one of the best edge guarders of the game.
Forwarder.
Like Joe, forwarder, ledge slip, R.O.B is also just crazy. Yep. Even counter in some matchups, right? So, don't let the Shulks know. It's a secret. Anyway, So I have it easy, I know, but at the same time, I also feel like a lot of people haven't bothered to explore offstage pressure too much. So I think a big issue in this game is how much you can do. Well, not an issue. Big theme in this game is how much you can do with very little, right? Like if you're a really good player and you focus just on time mix-ups, that dynamic alone can be good enough to get you in like top 50 in the world. At the same time, if you're a top level player and you focus entirely on space dynamics, that dynamic alone can get you to top 50 in the world. I sincerely believe like just focusing on these individual dynamics, they are complex enough and they are omnipresent enough for you to optimize it so far that you can become a high level threat, right? And so I think similarly, what a lot of people do is they focus first on the things that are the most consistent, right? Because like offstage pressure is not consistent. So why not optimize that which is going to be most frequent? And, as Tony says, when you roll 2 dice, what's the result you want? You want to get the 7s and the 8s, right? Like the best average results. Screw the 2s and the 12s. We want a 7 and the 8s. And so what people do is they optimize those 7 and the 8s to roll 8 more often than 7. That's essentially what it comes down to, right? The thing about optimizing edge guarding is that you're working with the extremes more so, but what people don't really what people haven't really realized is that there's still a lot of optimization to be done there. And I think what Tony said is right. For most people would 100% agree. If you're feeling like you need something that is a little bit more swingy, a little bit more high risk, high reward, you should make those offstage plays. But I think at the same time, there's a lot of people who don't make the offstage plays even when the circumstances are right. So, for example, you have a read on how the opponent likes to recover. You just don't want to take the risk because it's tournament, right? Or you have a read on when they like to use their double jump, but you don't want to take the risk because it's tournament. or there's a certain likelihood of just certain recoveries that is just a good gamble, but you feel like you don't have. And that doesn't mean that it's a bad choice. It just means that people haven't optimized these circumstances a lot yet, in my opinion. And so, while I agree with the points that you both have made entirely, I do think there's more nuance for edge guarding to be explored. I think people, they don't know what to look for, so they don't know how to optimize it. And as such, when they do try to go off stage, they kind of end up in what is essentially a high roll situation, a coin flip, right? They end up in a coin flip, and then they feel like, oh, this is a coin flip, I shouldn't do this. Whereas in reality, right, like what you should be looking for is like, what are the factors that make this less of a coin flip, right? That make it more of a die roll. And so instead of being discouraged when the coin flip doesn't go your way, I think that is like oftentimes a good indication to see where you can find more optimization. So that's my take. I don't know what you guys think. If you guys have anything to add, we can get into that. Otherwise, we can move on. What do you guys think?
Well, I will just say as a flip side on, or another example of a character who will say you should edge guard but shouldn't really pressure too much with ledge trapping is, like, for example, Kazuya. So it's not that you can't ledge trap Kazuya, but the risk reward against Kazuya is not stacked in your favor with the ledge trap. It's more of just another neutral situation, because if you're slightly off time, then you're going to eat an electric wind god fist, and then nobody's having a good time except for Kazuya. So what you want to do then is, obviously, as Charles mentioned, you want to focus on juggles, and then as Ramses mentioned, you want to focus on edge guards because those are still skewed in your favor. So as I said to start us off, there's a lot of context that you have to take into consideration.
Yeah, Kazuya, especially if the Kazuya has Rage Drive. Like, if you have a like Fox Neutra, I don't mind like Fox doing meaty aerials and stuff by Kazuya because his short hop's really short and Kazuya is a tall character. So doing Nair by for a ledge trap for a character like Fox specifically, you know, Fox is one of the best like meaty aerials to ledge trap in the game, so obviously like that's a very big privilege. But if he has Rage Drive gives frame 1 intangibility, so all of a sudden your Nair doesn't matter anymore. Like there's a lot of context to like so many situations, right? Because some characters can, some characters can't. If you are a character that can edge guard, I agree with Ramses in a sense where players are probably discouraged to do it because of the reversal effects of edge guarding too. Usually off the ledge, like you might get reversal off of a hit, but you're usually get hit back into the stage, so you don't lose center stage and stuff like that. So it's way less discouraging and consistent. When you botch an edge guard, especially in tournament, like let's just say I've seen many very tragic tournament losses that are even like just straight up SDs because they decided to go for an edge guard, they just fuck it up because their hands are sweating or shaking or whatever, right? So it's like, I think the backlash from edge guarding discourages a lot of people from doing it because when you fuck it up, it's like really bad. You either get reversal edge guard, USD, or you end up on the ledge and stuff like that, and you can lose the game. But it is a aspect of the game that you must understand to be good at the game, in my opinion. And so just try not to be discouraged. I think is the main takeaway.
I agree. Yeah, I would agree. I think the main takeaway is like, even if you don't see people do it at top level, that doesn't mean that it's not a viable strategy, right? Like you're watching Cloud Steve, right? Like the games there are going to be very specific. Most matchups are not that specific in terms of offstage play. So yeah, like my advice is not, oh, you should edge guard. My advice is, if your conclusion has been edge guards aren't worth it, I recommend you reconsider. And the reconsideration might lead to you confirming your opinion. And that's totally fine too, but I think it's at least worth exploring all of your options. Okay, so this is an interesting one. The topic is, I wrote down the topic as lower investment players. So let me read the question and you'll see what I mean. So the question is as follows. What do you think are the main factors that make players with relatively less competitive experience / time playing Smash able to compete with long-standing top-level professionals? It makes sense that a player's rate of improvement might slow down as they get better, but I would still expect rising to the top to be extremely difficult. What are these players likely doing that others aren't? Well, now I think the question of what these players are doing that others aren't is a little bit hard to answer because I think that's very personal. But I think it is interesting to talk about how you can catch up to people who are extremely veteran. And I think, Charles, especially for you, since you work with Void, you did that. You did that with Void. So I'd like to hear what your insights are, especially.
Yeah, sure. I think the main thing you have to, well, one, you don't automatically think that it's some kind of advantage to be a multi Smash game veteran. I think all of us have been playing since Brawl, so we can attest to every time switching over a game. I might have been in like a very salty mind state when I've said things like this, but I've said before that I wish Ultimate was my first Smash game because of like Brawl and Smash 4 really drilled in your brain that when you threw out an aerial, it was committal. And the top tiers of the game had the least committal aerials. So, which is like, that was a very, very large factor of what made characters good. If your moves were not as committal, then you're like, that's what made good characters, but they were still like pretty committal. So in Ultimate, it's a very, very different Smash game you're playing. All right. And I mean, I've talked to a lot of old school people, like a lot of veterans that like I'll talk to and they'll be like, yeah, I can't play Ultimate, dude. It's like neutral seems like such a coin toss. Like it's so fucking mashy. Like everyone can just throw arrows out. There's like no lag on anything. Auto L cancels turned on, yada yada, right? And that's just one aspect, right? All on top of parrying, perfect shielding was in Brawl and Smash 4. So that even just getting used to all these different mechanics as someone that has played Smash Brothers and two other Smash games, maybe even more if you count like PM and some other stuff, right? Melee, if you've dabbled in that as well. So kind of getting that mixed bag and being like, okay, it's okay to do that, but not okay to do this. But okay, ledge trapping's kind of the same as Smash 4, but like, oh wait, I have to parry now. So you don't, especially right at the beginning. Now, obviously, the veterans have probably got acclimated to the game by now, but don't automatically assume just because you have past experience in past other Smash games, it's all advantage. Overall, is it an advantage? I would say overall, it's probably an advantage, right? But I also think there is a type of advantage, like a pretty large one, in my opinion, coming in the Ultimate for certain aspects of the game where it's like, oh, okay, like this is my first ever Smash experience, right? And I think the most important thing is mentality. It's going to be like mentality and efficiency, right? How just because we all put 1 hour into something doesn't mean we all got the same amount of like learning experience from it, right? And having an open mentality, being like talking about the game, right? Like it's so, I think it's interesting because a lot of people think like, oh wow, so this player is probably really good because they play like 10 hours a day, yada yada, right? But it's like maybe they put 10 hours into Smash, but it's not necessarily playing the game, right? And like every time you spend time with Smash Brothers, you have to make sure you're getting something really valuable out of it. And having a good mentality can help you with that because it won't like shift the blame to other areas, right? So if you take responsibility for some of your mistakes, right? So like say I'm playing Ultimate year one, I'm like, fuck, this guy's just mashing, like this game's trash. In the other previous Smash games I played, like you couldn't just fucking mash like this, so this guy has no fundies, like da 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 da. But and like I'm essentially deflecting what I should be learning, right? Like, oh, okay, well this game there's no end lag on certain things, so like how do I like one thing I had a lot of trouble with in the beginning of the game was whiff punishing. I'm like, fuck, I can't whiff punish anyone. Like I'm playing. Like, how do I whiff punish people when auto L cancel's turned on? And it's like, you got to find other answers, right? So just with your mentality, try not to deflect things because when you deflect something, you're putting it to the side and you're not going to face you're not going to like actually try to learn how to deal with that, right? So you kind of put it off to the side and it doesn't get dealt with. And then you're going to continue to run into those issues, right? So I would say mentality in a sense of not deflecting is going to be one of the most important things because you just face everything head on. Like, I have this problem. I need to fix this problem. And it's not the game. It's me. It's not my opponent. It's me, right? So I think that's the most important thing. And then making your time efficient with the game. Not trying to just play for 5 hours mindlessly with no goals, right? Go into sets with goals or go into play session with goals in mind. I'm trying to work on X or Y. I'm trying to work on whiff punishing. And this will snowball off of you accepting what you're essentially before what we're deflecting, right? So that is probably the two main things. Void, I mean, I'll admit Void was a very special case. Like, obviously,
Yeah,
he's a very talented player. He had like these absurd strengths that I was dealing with in terms of as a coach that I could prompt up. Right, his punish game was very exceptional. His technical prowess was very exceptional. He could lab for hours and not get bored. I don't. There's not a lot of people that can do that. Right, so. Right. So Void was a very special case scenario. I don't think every person is like Void, but that's okay. Uh, that just means that the process might have to take a little longer, but I think everyone can get to the point Void was getting to. But it's just he's very talented, right? So it's like that alongside of there. It was a very specific time in his life that came together, and specific resources fell into his lap. Right now is everyone going to have someone like myself that is going to just like dedicate practically most of my time into coaching someone out of nowhere, and that person and Void just got out of high school, he could spend all of his time like I would go work my construction job for 8 hours, right? Because and I was also like paying rent and stuff like that, right? So it's like he lived at my house most of the time, so it's like we were living together, and then I would go to work, I would set up schedules, and like the whole time I'm at work he's just playing Smash. I'm like, okay, like lab for X amount of hours, practice this thing for X amount of hours, and I would come back, then I would grind Smash with him until I had to go to sleep. So that's like another 6 to 8 hours of him like playing a person and applying all of these things, and me just savagely getting abused in friendlies because he's labbing all these crazy like 0 to 80 perfect pivot combos. But yeah, so
Every
Void
coach
had
has
a
been there.
yes. So it's like
That's the classic. Is like you're losing as a coach, and then you're like, you're doing it wrong. Even though you just got like 3 stocks, you're like, you're doing it wrong.
Dude, it's crazy. There would be times where we'd be practicing like the Luigi matchup, and I obviously don't play Luigi, but if I would get a grab, I would not do anything. Grab release, I would be like, lose a stock. Like, you're dead. Like, against a good
Exactly,
Luigi, you're
yeah.
dead. I'm not a good Luigi, but I can at least like somewhat play neutral with this character. So stuff like that. I think the two main takeaways is just trying to be efficient, and also like talk to your peers, talk to other people. Just because you're better than I think this is something Void did extremely well. Just because you can beat someone in Smash doesn't mean you can't learn anything from them, and that like doesn't even apply just to coaches. Like I've gone to locals, and I consider myself pretty knowledgeable about the game. I've gone to locals and I've talked to people that go O2 about the game, and I want their takes and I want their opinions, right? And I want to see how they see the game. There's like sometimes there is scenarios where it's like this might feel like it's just a right or a wrong answer or something like that, but try not to. The cool thing about Smash is that it's not as black and white as it seems. You know what I mean? It's a very, there's a lot of different perspectives, right? So yeah, I mean that's my main takeaway from that question.
Do you want to say something, Tony, or should I give my?
Well, you can go first.
I was just gonna jump in. I think what Charles talked about first was extremely important, like your growth mindset. If you at home, if you want to learn more about that, I recommend looking up the locus of control, which is a theory in psychology about basically how you internalize your control, right? And it kind of like divides circumstances into control versus no control, and then internal versus external, right? So if you have internal control, it's about your own ability. If it's about the external control, it's about the difficulty of the task, right? So that's going to determine how much control you have. Whereas if you feel like you have no control, and it's like external, it feels like it's like luck or like the game sucks, right? So the more you can pull towards your internal feeling of control, the better you're going to be doing at improving. In general, about the topic of catching up to players who are more veteran, I think what Charles said about like I wish I'd learned Ultimate first, I think that's so important, because I think a big reason why new players compete with veterans is because they look at every interaction from like an Ultimate perspective, or from a Smash 4 perspective, or from a Brawl perspective, whatever the new game is, right? And what you find is that oftentimes these more veteran players, they try to kind of like force their view of the game on the game, right? So like I don't want to call people out, but you hear Tweak talk about my Smash Brothers, which I don't think that's inherently a bad thing, but it does show like he doesn't want to play Ultimate. He wants to play my Smash Brothers. And you could argue the same about Mutace, and there's a lot more players like that. And so what you find is that a lot of these newer players that come up and just do well, they are, well, first of all, either very used to Ultimate, or they're very willing to just like play the way that the game wants them to play. And I think, for example, Zamba is a great example of that, right? Zamba just an absolute beast, and I think a lot of that is like, well, his initial just like attitude for the game through experience, and then as of late, right, the recent push he's gotten is largely that open-mindedness. So a lot of it is going to be in, well, kind of going back to the growth mindset. It's all going to be about like how well are you accepting your circumstances and working with them. And then, of course, a large part of it is your work ethic as well. I think a lot of people who are like, oh, they're a veteran, I cannot catch up to them. A lot of them, they will, well, they misjudge how many hours you need to put in to do so. If you play against a veteran who has that 100 hours in, and they play just as much as you do, then of course you're not going to catch up. But there's always room, like if you wanted to work harder, or if not, work smarter, which oftentimes requires a little bit of hard work, right? Like you first need to understand the theory, and then your time becomes more efficient. And if you don't have that theory advantage either, then it often becomes a bit of a time race, in my opinion. But like the question stated, there are diminishing returns on competition. And especially when we think about things like meta changes and just like the sheer amount of matchups in this game, a lot of the time that top players have put into the game, well, it gives them more ways to be flexible. These skills don't necessarily apply to the current meta. They don't necessarily apply to the current matchup. So there's a lot of room for you to win, even if you're not 100% as flexible, 100% as experienced, 100% as skilled. Because, you know, like if the quote unquote better player always won, then we wouldn't have to do tournaments, right? There's always some fluctuation in who wins and who loses. So I think at the end of the day, all of that though, it doesn't fucking matter. What you got to do is you got to go home and you got to do what you got to do, right? Like the only way you're going to catch up is by controlling what you can control. And what can you control? The efficiency, the effort, the, you know, just the time you spend and how you spend it. That's what it comes down to. So yeah, I think the question in and of itself, it kind of assumes a lot of things. And I think a lot of those assumptions are kind of unhealthy by definition. So what I recommend is if you're trying to catch up to someone who you feel is more veteran, more experienced than you, my recommendation is don't care, control what you can control.
So I think what it comes down to is to avoid restating what Charles and Ramses have already said, because they've already said very important things. I will say that you want to identify what it takes to reach the level that you're looking for, what those other players have that you don't. And then where I think most players make a mistake here is they try and look at what got other players there and think, well, they put a lot of time into practicing improvement, et cetera, and I'm trying to catch up, so I need to find a different path, and then they try and take a shortcut. Except if that shortcut was just there, either you're going to be the first person to find it, or you're actually not taking a shortcut, which is what happens most of the time. And so you need to, instead of just trying to force a shorter time of improvement, just follow what you see has already worked for everyone else, because I assure you a lot of the players who are out there already actually wasted a lot of their time being inefficient, or either discovering however paths they were going to take to get there, or maybe they had similar thoughts where they just thought they needed to catch up to the generation that was there before them. But I think you'll find that actually just taking the path that already has proven to work, just sticking to it and being consistent, is going to get you a high level of success in pretty much any pursuit that you make in life, and especially applicable here. So that's all I really have to add.
Something I think is worth adding there as well is that I think like following the unbeaten path, the walk path, the path that is known. I think that is a very powerful thing, but I think something that people struggle with is that they don't know what the path is. They just see someone that's good and they're like, okay, I'll try to imitate them. And something that I think again, to add to what Tony said, I think what you're going to find is if you try to get to the same point, you're going to have a lot of success. And what you're also going to find is a lot of ways in which what they're doing doesn't work for you. So what I recommend is as you're walking that path, as you're trying to imitate the greats, be on the lookout for what works, but also be on the lookout for what doesn't work, and be ready to like reflect on that, rather than to either say, "Oh, I have to brute force it to work," or saying it doesn't work for me. It shouldn't like I shouldn't pursue it. I think every single time you try to imitate someone and you don't see the same results, that is a really, really good indication that you need to reflect on why. So those moments to me are like some of the most powerful that you can find in that catch-up journey.
Yeah, for sure. Just tracking the data.
Yeah, reflecting. Should we do one more?
Yeah. We got a good amount of time.
Okay, cool. So I think this is a bit of a longer question, but it's about strengths in the meta. Okay, so here's the question. I've noticed that Smash Ultimate's roster size has had a substantial effect on the attributes that make a character good, with the best characters being those that are low in certain key execution requirements, like Cloud, so low execution. 2, dramatically dominant in certain areas, like Kazuya or Fox, or have some sort of strategy that is very universal, like Sonic. I'm curious to know what other attributes the fine minds at Coach's Corner would use to explain our current meta, and to hear about y'all's expectations for the future as people's execution and strategies continue to evolve. Or to simplify, what makes a character good in Ultimate, and in particular, what things make a character good in Smash Ultimate that didn't apply to other Smash games? So yeah, what are good qualities to have in the current meta that aren't standard, right? So every meta has like, oh, you should be a fast character, oh, you should do a lot of damage. What are qualities that you guys think are unique to the current meta that make a character strong?
This is a tough one. I think early. So I agree with all of the aspects that have been stated, right? So easy execution. We got like Game & Watch. We got Cloud, right? What were the other listed there?
Well, for execution, they just listed Cloud.
Right. But like I'm gonna throw like Game & Watch in there too, obviously, and stuff like that, right?
Exactly.
And then there was like Kazuya and Fox were just like
dominant.
really dominant in like one area, right? So I mean I would argue Fox is dominant in more than one area.
The question is drastically dominant in certain / many areas.
Like crazy strong in like one department, right? So I agree with that. I've always personally valued options and disadvantage, which is why I still think Pikachu is a fairly strong character, even though it's a little higher on the execution wise, and SDI has gotten a little bit better and stuff like that. Pikachu.
What about Wario then?
I mean, Wario does have pretty solid options in disadvantage. You have one of the best like air drifts in the game with air acceleration, so you can kind of like wiggle around, right? So yeah, I mean, I would agree. Wario definitely I don't think it's as good as Pikachu, but it's still very strong. And then the reversal from the air coming out from Wario is really good. Like if he like drifts a tad bit back and microspaces one of your juggle attempts and then comes back in with like a soft air or a nair and can kill you at 40 off waft, right? So yeah, I think that's one specific tool I always held in high regard, is like what options you have in disadvantage. And then obviously in previous Smash games that was very strong, considering like Brawl Meta Knight didn't really have a disadvantage. In fact, he could be on the ledge the whole entire time and you would just have to look at him and count all the way up until however much the ledge grab count was.
35 usually.
Yeah, counting the 35, very important to do in Brawl. And then in Smash 4, yeah, fundies. and then in Smash 4 we had Bayonetta with the arguably the strongest disadvantage in the game as well. You could get reversal at 0%. You could come off the Angel platform and think that you were winning the game and you could swing, and Bayonetta could witch time you and kill you at 0. And then obviously ledge jump into witch time would put her backwards so she would fall off the stage, and then witch twist you would be regrabbing the ledge, but it had a huge disjoint, so it was very hard to punish Bayonetta for regrabbing the ledge. So another character that was the strongest in X previous Smash game and had really strong disadvantage. It was very hard, even when you won neutral against Bayonetta, it was very valuable to have a KO throw because grabs could not activate which time, right? But other characters had to commit to actually swinging, so it was just always like it always felt like you're flipping coins with Bayonetta, and if you flipped wrong, you died. So it was yeah, I think that aspect it definitely should be put on that list, and it's something I personally put very high. And even like characters like Sonic, I think Sonic has a pretty solid disadvantage. I don't think it's as crazy as like Pikachu or anything like that, but still a lot of options. You can even like up B on a juggle and still swing or air dodge, right? Has a very
That's
good
crazy.
directional air dodge. When we one thing I forgot to bring up when we were talking about how underrated Bayo was, thank God Bayo has one of the shittiest directional air dodges in the game. Think if she had a good directional air dodge, right? It would be
That'd be crazy.
That would be insane. Thank God they made it bad. Because like the fact that you can like do special into air dodge, like we've seen a lot of Bayos like do that mix up anyway to like platforms and stuff, but she drops like a rock as soon as she starts the directional air dodge, which thank God it's very needed. But yeah, I would like to hear your thoughts, Ramses, on like what aspect or like I guess category or attribute, right? It's like so hard because there's so many different attributes nowadays because and like how big the roster is and stuff like that.
People succeed in so many different ways. I think so. Something that has been that has stood out to me about Ultimate since the beginning is how in a lot of cases the game has kind of pulled power away from the individual characters and put it into like fundamental just like engine aspects, right? So in this game, movement is way stronger than it was in Smash 4, just like through the flexibility of dashes, short hops being lower duration, less landing lag on things, etc., right? So overall rolls are better as far as I know. Like roll-in was broken.
Even full hop. I remember everyone at the E3 demo, they felt like one thing that I was talking about with everyone at the E3 demo when we were playing Ultimate for the first time, everyone's like, dude, when you full hop, it feels like you're just teleporting up into the air. Like just how fast you get to the apex of your jump was like so quick compared to other Smash games. So just the general pacing too is just insanely faster.
They buffed a lot of like dash and air speeds too. Like overall, just like there's a lot more power in the general options. I think most people would agree on that. However, the individual characters overall got weaker. If you think about like top tiers in Smash 4, is like Bayo, who she was like kind of fundies, but she played it in her own way. Then you have Cloud. He was kind of fundies, but he played it in his own way. Sheik, kind of fundies, played it in his own way. Diddy, Corrin, Marth, right? Like a lot of these top tiers played fundies in their own style. And then there were exceptions, of course, like Sonic and Rosa, who kind of just like did their own thing. But those were kind of rare. And I feel like in this game, more often than not, you're either fundies or you're doing your own thing. And that in-between area where a lot of the Smash 4 characters were, that doesn't exist as much anymore. I think most of the time you're either playing like honest fundies, think about something like a Cloud. And yes, Cloud Becker is crazy, but like, you know, put that on the bingo card. Yes, Cloud Becker is crazy, but it is a lot more honest than it used to be in it, like compared to how he played as neutral in Smash 4. And I think something like Fox as well, right? Like Fox, he basically just plays fundies. Wolf basically just plays fundies. Lucina, Palutena, a lot of these characters, essentially Joker, right? And so what you see is that like the characters that don't, they have like extremely specific game plans. Kazuya, Steve, Pac-Man, Min, right? Like all like these characters are extremely like basically they do what they want. So what I notice is that like instead of it being like, okay, we're playing fundies in our own way, it's either like you're playing pure fundies or you're playing entirely in your own way. And there's exceptions, of course. I think like a character like Inkling is like a character that plays fundies in her own way, right? But they're far and few in between. So that's something that I think is something that we're noticing in the current meta, is that if you want to succeed, you either need like a really good like unique strategy like a Sonic, or you need to basically have a lot of ways to play your fundies like a Cloud or a Fox. So that's how I think the game is very different compared to at least how I view Brawl and Smash 4, which is the games that I competed in mostly.
So for me personally, the broad strokes for me is the same in every game, regardless of genre, and that I'm looking to win the game in as simple and as quick a manner as possible so that my opponent has as few opportunities to win the game before I do. And if I have the opportunity to stop them from winning the game, that's great. But my first priority is actually winning. And so whenever we look at fairly polarized matchups at top tier, usually what we see is it's two characters kind of racing to win the game first, and then sometimes one of them has a way of lowering the other one's win percentage while also then setting up for their own win con. So for using the Meta Knight example, Meta Knight struggles, even though it's a winning matchup against Ice Climbers, just because if Meta Knight did lose, he generally was losing because Ice Climbers was better at winning. And so
You're talking about in Brawl, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we would then see as the matchup evolved was that the meta players were essentially playing entirely around stopping Ice Climbers from winning, and then also once they could convert it down, you could count on the Meta Knight players taking the stock when they did touch Ice Climbers. And so it essentially became two touch of death characters, where there was kind of a dance where Ice Climbers couldn't force a hit, but Meta Knight could. And so it was basically an even matchup, except only one of these two characters had the way of forcing an interaction. And so when you would talk to the Ice Climbers players about it, because they didn't have the actual locus of control on the neutral, they would say that this essentially even matchup felt like it was very strongly in Meta Knight's favor because they were not the ones who were choosing who was winning the game. And so going into Smash 4, I felt like the best thing you could be doing is to essentially most characters, especially at launch Smash, are at, I would say, within a few months of patches of Smash 4, so most of Smash 4's lifespan, most of the cast could not touch of death you without having rage. And so you were typically at a disadvantage for attempting to take a strong and dominant winning advantage because you couldn't guarantee that you could finish your food. And then if you did have rage, most of the cast did have touch of deaths on deck then. And so you were better off having a very narrow touch of death combo that you were likely to lose with because your opponent wasn't going to punish you enough to one touch you. And so if you played that way and then set up so that you also had your rage follow-ups and your backup winning plans, you were set so that you could basically try and zero to death your opponent, and then if it didn't work out, your opponent puts you into rage percent, and then you have an easier time trying to zero to death your opponent. And so even though it looked like it was in your opponent's favor, in practice, you get to roll your dice twice, and they roll once. So going into Ultimate, that was my mentality. And I spent hundreds of hours studying Ultimate without ever feeling like I understood at any point what the game was going for. But what we were looking for, or what I was looking for at the start of Ultimate, was probably the base actual movement stats of the characters, looking at their fast fall speeds, how quick their initial dash frames are, like how much control you can have over this character, where you can position yourself with them. Because at the end of the day, if all else is in a vacuum, this isn't even just Smash, but any fighting game in general, and most action games in general, in my experience, having a mobility advantage is one of the strongest things you can possibly have. And the reason for that is because whether you are looking for a solution or to counter your opponent's solutions, having more options is better than having fewer options. Even if the fewer options tend to be particularly strong, they have to be multiple times stronger than the many options in order to be better. And so when you look at characters like Kazuya, if you actually talk with the Kazuya players, they feel that many of the options are not actually that strong because they are typically very narrow. And so they are much more reasonable to play around, even though they are very powerful when they do come up. So in a vacuum, many of these characters have very powerful options, but those are all they have. They don't have anything in between. They don't have these gradients that you can mix between. And so characters with a bit broader series of brushes that they can paint the game with, characters like Chrom, for example, tend to flower with more effort. But once they do flower, it's usually just to reach the same levels that the other cast are getting there. And so what I look for, though, is the ability to simplify the game while preparing yourself to counter against other players who simplify the game if their game plan is fragile. So if all you need to shut down your touch of death combos is you haven't practiced against frame 2 air dodge, then you don't really need anything else to get out of disadvantage than just having a frame 2 air dodge. And so the idea there is that that actually is enough. Even going into like high and top level players against these very strong advantage state players, is if their advantage is based on true combos, just having a niche disadvantage tool to make these more complex is all it takes. And on the flip side, if your game plan is not robust enough that you can answer those 2 frame air dodges, then my focus is always going to be on making your game plan closer to being absolute, like reaching that 99% threshold where if I do lane this hit, the game is over 99% of the time. And so that's usually where I start first. And obviously we've talked about this plenty of times. But on a larger scale level, though, I'm going to kind of reiterate what Ramses said. What I value the most looking at Ultimate in general is your ability to adhere to whatever your game plan is, your way of playing the game, and while turning off your opponent's ability to play the game, whatever that game is. Now, this is most obvious when you have something like building a wall or running away from your opponent, because then they can't force an interact. But this can also be just changing the actual nature of the matchup. So this is having something like having a Brawl Falco laser, having a Min arm set that's swinging out neutral. It's going to change the way that you approach the game. And that's something that is usually enough to completely shut down entire character matchups, just because you are no longer playing your character's game. You're now playing your character's B plan or C plan. And if you don't have that B plan or C plan, then the game is over right then and there. And so what I value most is your ability to have a powerful A plan that is going to be consistent enough that you show up game 1 and you don't actually have to see what you're sitting across from in order to have your game plan be viable and consistent. And so I think that the most powerful thing you can do in Ultimate, again, coming back to simplification, is sit down and know that what you are planning to do is going to work. And it doesn't require the context of, well, what if my opponent's playing a character with this weight class? Or what if my opponent actually has a fireball habit? Or what if my opponent likes to roll a lot? Like, if these things are very concerning to you, then you need to work on your consistency of your A plan or get a new game plan altogether, even if that means changing your character, because that is what I think is the strongest thing you can do.
To add on to that, something that I've been talking about so much in coaching recently is win conditions, right? And like, if you want to rephrase what I talked about, right, like fundamental win conditions versus like just character specific win conditions, another way to define these things that I value in the current meta. And I think your A plan should just be the most optimized combination of your win conditions possible, partially in terms of how you combine them to create a strong mix-up situation, and partially how they lead into each other, right? So at the end of the day, how we're going to win is by finding the weakest link in what the opponent's doing. Whatever they're not doing, right? So opportunity cost wise, whatever they're not doing, whatever they're not aware of, whatever they are neglecting, that is where we want to like strike the hardest. But finding that, we need to find that while being, like Tony said, while being optimal. So the best way, in my opinion, to find their weakness is to confront them with basically situations in which they need to commit as much as possible. And we do that through trying to achieve our win conditions. And what's the easiest way to achieve your win condition? It's moving, right? Moving into a position that the opponent doesn't want you to be. And that's where we go back to what Tony said initially. Mobility makes you generally the strongest that you can be in basically any competitive games, because it gives you the options. And it's not just like giving you options. No, it's giving you more win conditions. And more win conditions means that the opponents need to be either more ready beforehand or they need to be more correct. And either way, they're committing more. And if they're committing more, they have to make more choices. The more choices they make, the more mistakes they can make. And the more mistakes they can make, the more likely we are to find that kink in the armor. So really, really agree with everything that Tony said. Yeah, Charles, I think that was a good list of questions for today.
Yeah. Perfect timing too. We're getting around the hour mark. So hope you guys enjoyed the content. And we're going to try and answer all the questions on the Stride Esports Discord. So really looking forward to that. There's a bunch of amazing questions. So next episode, we'll continue doing that. Or we might, I think, I'll think about it. We can either do the rest of the questions, or I actually want to dive into, the Why Do Week will be over by then, I think. So I think diving into that could be interesting as well. But Nonetheless, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy the content. Make sure to rate it if you're listening on Spotify as well. And until next time, class dismissed.